put their weapons down and say, hey,
they actually
let's
did.
stop.
They actually did. In Indiana, they tried to do just that. They said, you know what?
That is not a good example. That is not a good example.
They said, we're not going to gerrymander.
Hold on, Lydia. That is not what happened, okay? Republicans did not say we're going to stop doing this. Some Republicans voted against it, and then they were targeted by the president this week, and 5 out of 7 of them voted out of their seats. And while that was happening down in Florida, a Republican governor, Ron DeSantis, said that he was going to redistrict his state to eliminate Democratic representation.
That was a moment.
There is no ceasefire happening on the part of Republicans.
That was a ceasefire. And in response...
In today's video, Abby Phillip catches Lydia Moynihan blatantly lying on Newsnight with Abby Phillip. This clash gets intense fast because it's not just about politics anymore. It's about whether politicians are choosing voters instead of voters choosing politicians. And when districts are intentionally carved up to weaken black communities and create safe seats, it stops being a normal strategy and starts looking like modern voter suppression dressed up as redistricting. So let's dive in and watch how Abby Phillip shuts down Lydia Moynihan on Newsnight with Abby Phillip.
Let me play an exchange that a Democratic state lawmaker had with a Republican about how they managed to carve up the black voters in the state in the way that they did.
So is that correct that the census data was the sole basis for drawing these lines from 2020?
Speaker Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, it's my understanding the census was used to draft the map you have in front of you.
Chairman Clement.
Based on the population.
Okay, well, that's pretty interesting because census data doesn't include any partisan scores or partisan data. And your entire argument this entire week has been that this is about politics and partisanship. So if you solely relied on census data, I'm confused about how you knew partisan scores when drawing this map, if that wasn't even considered.
Speaker Zachary.
Thank you. Did you have a question?
He doesn't answer the question because it is a good question. Are they using just census data, or are they using race as a proxy for partisanship? And is that really, I mean, is that a smokescreen for carving up black voters?
I mean, you use proxies for partisanship based on socioeconomic factors, on income, on
race.
Geography, on zip code.
On race?
I've frankly have never seen that in any analyses that I've seen, though prior to the Cali decision, when there were redistricting efforts, they would look at that factor, they would look at race to figure out whether or not they're in compliance of Section 2 of the VRA. Now we're in a different world where we're not cabineting specific districts. Just like to state for the record, this is the guy who is currently representing that area.
So what? I mean,
we had
I don't
these
understand.
independent redistricting commissions.
What's the point of pointing out that Steve Cohen as well?
My point, we have the same issue in Michigan where we have an independent redistricting commission, right? It's independent. There's always going to be politics and gerrymandering, regardless of how you try to dress it up with nonpartisan commissions. You can try to control for the partisanship, but you're never going to eliminate that element. But I will say that, but the rich irony is that in both California and Virginia, they had independent redistricting commissions. They wanted to reform it, and then they cast off the shackles of the principles as soon as it was politically convenient.
Well, they asked the voters, unlike any of the other states that did not ask the voters.
Actually deceived the voters, depending on how
I'm actually glad.
Let's
Let's show the picture again. I'm glad that you brought up that he's a white representative that represents black districts, because guess what? They had the opportunity to choose. This is about taking away black Americans' opportunity to choose who they want to represent them. So whether that is white Representative Cohen, if that is Representative Pearson, who's black, who's running for that same district, who is, running against Cohen, the bottom line is it was set up, the Article 2 of the Voting Rights Act was set up to allow my community to have the choice, because so many choices have been taken away from us. And so when you take that away,
it is
when you take, but that's the element we're going to focus on tonight.
Let's look at Michigan.
Now, Peter Mayer is technically right that politics always plays a role in redistricting. That part has been true forever. But the issue is when politicians start using race and geography together to intentionally weaken voting power while pretending it's all neutral math based on census numbers. And honestly, the question the lawmaker asked in that clip is the exact question people should be asking. If maps are supposedly only based on census population data, then how do map makers somehow know exactly how to split up Democratic voters, black neighborhoods, college towns, or urban communities with surgical precision every single time? That's where the race as a proxy conversation matters. After the Shelby County v. Holder Supreme Court decision weakened key parts of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, a lot of states moved aggressively to redraw districts in ways critics say diluted minority voting strength. You can see it in places like Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, and North Carolina, where majority black or heavily Democratic districts suddenly got carved apart into multiple conservative districts. And this doesn't only hurt black voters politically, it makes elections less competitive overall. When politicians create safe seats, they stop worrying about persuading average voters and start focusing only on surviving partisan primaries. That's a huge reason why Congress has become so extreme and dysfunctional over the last decade. Teslin's broader point about choice is important too. Representation isn't about forcing people to vote for someone because they share the same race. It's about making sure communities have a fair opportunity to choose candidates who actually reflect their interests. Sometimes that's a black candidate, sometimes it isn't. But when districts are intentionally engineered to weaken a community's influence, that choice disappears before voting even starts. And that's why so many people see modern gerrymandering as more than politics. They see it as a democracy issue.
Congressional delegation.
Yeah.
I mean, there were a number of VRA seats that were drawn to make sure they had the appropriate amount of African American voters, which, you know, the assumption there is on the partisanship. Not a single one of them is represented by an African American representative.
Go back. And I got
only representative in Congress.
I have a problem with that
You
too.
have to admit, it's a little ironic that the woman now who is likely going to win the 9th district in Tennessee is a black Republican woman as a result of this redistricting effort. It's likely going to be a black Republican woman who beats that old white man.
I just wanted to make the basic point that in the presidential election, Trump got 65%, Kamala Harris got 35%. So it's easy to assume that Tennessee is 35% Democratic. Of the current 9 seats, 1 seat is Democratic. Of 35%, it would be 3 seats would be Democratic. Right now it's 1. Under this new redistricting, it'll be 9 Republican, 0 Democratic. That's just not right. And this is happening all over our country, and it's destroying our country.
Yeah, I mean, Republicans were just complaining about this very thing in Virginia a couple weeks ago. And so now this is an even more extreme example of how, putting aside race for a second, just if you're a Democrat in the state, you have no shot of having a representative that has your interests in mind in Washington at this point.
Which is similar to many places in the Northeast. And I will say, I mean, I think the Tennessee move is in direct retaliation. And I'll say retaliation because Hakeem Jeffrey said it was maximum warfare. That's what he said after the Virginia redistricting
He was responding to Trump redistricting Texas.
Right.
Which was in response to New York.
Why don't we just all agree?
Why don't we all agree?
We're all different viewpoints. Why don't we all agree this is wrong? Gerrymandering is wrong. Safe seats is hurting our country because people do not listen to the people when they're in safe seats. They just pander to their base, and that's killing our country. Let's all agree. Conservative, liberal, moderate, all of us, whatever you guys are. Let's all agree this is wrong.
Agree. It's wrong.
And let's also agree that they won't be changing it. And let's also agree it's time for tit for tat. I know you say you don't want tit for tat. I'll support tit for tat.
When a state can have roughly 1/3 Democratic voters and still end up with almost 0 Democratic representation, people are obviously going to feel like the system is rigged before they even step into a voting booth. And honestly, this isn't just a Republican problem or a Democrat problem anymore. It's become an arms race. You see it in Texas, Tennessee, New York, Illinois, North Carolina. Both parties are constantly trying to maximize seats instead of maximize representation. But the long-term effect is brutal for democracy because it creates these ultra-safe districts where politicians are more afraid of losing a primary to extremists than losing a general election to normal voters. That's a huge reason Congress feels so dysfunctional now. Political scientists have talked for years about how safe seats increase polarization because politicians no longer have incentives to compromise. If your district is engineered to be 70% red or 70% blue, the only people you really worry about are the loudest activists in your own party. And Tom's broader point about proportional representation matters too. Tennessee isn't some 95% Republican state. Millions of Democratic voters live there. Same thing in heavily blue states where Republicans get boxed out, when entire groups of voters basically lose a voice in Congress because of map engineering. Frustration and distrust explode. The racial element matters too because modern gerrymandering often overlaps directly with racial voting patterns. After the Shelby County v. Holder Supreme Court decision weakened protections under the Voting Rights Act of 1965, states gained far more freedom to redraw districts in ways critics argue dilute minority voting power. Meanwhile, regular voters are stuck with less competition, less accountability, and politicians who increasingly only speak to their own echo chambers.
If the East,
what's the problem? We're not going to resolve anything.
Oh, no, it's okay. But you guys want to go there, so let's go there. Let's tit for tat. And with Representative Pearson, the energy that he brought today, and I put it out on my social media, everybody was loving it. They're not going to change it. So crying about it's not going to make a difference. California's going to make up the difference. Virginia's going to make up the difference. Organizing voters, Democrats need to flip the House and need to expand the Supreme Court because that's what this is about.
But where does this end?
It ends at the For the People's Act.
That's it.
The Democrats tried to pass and all voted for that banned partisan gerrymandering. It ends where we make dark money out of politics. It ends when you put Democrats who already voted for the John Lewis Voter Rights Act back in power, and you actually pass those things that make voter election day a holiday, that give us mail-in ballots, that give us safety in voting. All the things the Republicans are currently trying to rip away. Voter suppression started with gerrymandering, and then closing polling stations, and then limiting drop boxes, and then mail-in voting, and early voting, and same-day registration. Those are all taking away from certain communities that vote Democratic. We have to stop doing that. And it ends when you put Democrats in charge and you actually pass the laws that they tried to pass before and all voted for and Republicans voted against.
It ends with Democrats in charge? That's the goal. Okay, that is the goal. That's why the gerrymandering happens.
Protections. And
this is why the gerrymander keeps happening.
But Lydia,
Republicans are doing it in response to that.
Should Republicans end put their weapons down and say, hey, let's stop.
They actually did. In Indiana, they tried to do just that. They said, you know what?
That is not a good example. That is not a good example.
They said, we're not going to gerrymander.
Hold on, Lydia. That is not what happened, okay? Republicans did not say we're going to stop doing this. Some Republicans voted against it, and then they were targeted by the president this week. And 5 out of 7 of them voted out of their seats. And while that was happening down in Florida, a Republican governor, Ron DeSantis, said that he was going to redistrict his state to eliminate Democratic representation.
That was a moment.
There is no ceasefire happening on the part of Republicans.
That was a ceasefire. And in response to the ceasefire in Indiana, Virginia said, hold my beer, let me get rid of all of the wrong
Lydia,
votes.
you know, it wasn't a ceasefire, it was more like a mutiny. And President Trump hated the fact that they pushed back on him. And you know why he hated it so much? He hated it because
it's
not
count Indiana. That just doesn't. No one cares.
I'm just saying,
no one cares that they opted not to gerrymander.
That's not the same thing as Republicans saying we're not going to gerrymander anymore. Because at the same time that was happening, they were planning to gerrymander in Florida.
But you know what? You know what? All of those Republicans who were upset were right because Indiana said we're going to stop it. And then,
and guess what?
Virginia decided to gerrymander, so they were
and then Republicans spent $6 million voting them out of their seats.
And Democrats.
After the Shelby County v. Holder Supreme Court ruling weakened parts of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, a wave of states started changing voting laws, reducing polling locations, tightening mail voting rules, and redrawing maps in ways critics say disproportionately affected Democratic and minority voters. That's why people on the left increasingly stopped seeing gerrymandering as just normal politics and started seeing it as part of a much bigger strategy around voter access and power. And honestly, Abby's point about the inconsistency matters too. Republicans sometimes talk about fairness and ending partisan warfare, but then you'll see aggressive redistricting efforts in places like Florida, Texas, and Tennessee happening at the exact same time. So from the Democratic perspective, calls for a ceasefire can sound hollow when maps are still being drawn to maximize one-party control. What's really dangerous long-term is how this creates a feedback loop. One side gerrymanders harder, the other side retaliates harder, and eventually voters stop believing elections are competitive at all. Political scientists have warned for years that safe districts increase polarization because politicians stop worrying about persuading moderates and instead focus only on surviving extreme primaries. That's part of why Congress feels permanently stuck in culture war mode now. And Lee's argument about federal voting standards actually reflects proposals Democrats already pushed through legislation like the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. Those bills included things like independent redistricting standards, expanded early voting, automatic voter registration, and protections against partisan map drawing. Whether people agree with every part of those bills or not, the broader concern is real. When politicians can manipulate districts and voting rules to protect themselves, accountability weakens fast. At some point, both parties are going to have to decide whether they actually want competitive democracy or just permanent political trench warfare.